Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video we're going to learn about PyQt5 Qt Designer. So Qt Designer is this tool provided by PyQt5 to enable simpler and faster creation of these graphical user interfaces. This video is beginner friendly. If you've never used Qt Designer before, then this video is definitely for you, and if you've used it and want to learn more, then this video is also for you as well. The one thing I will not cover in this video is how to set up and install PyQt5 as well as Qt Designer. So I have a separate video for that. It's really short, so I highly recommend checking that out first if you don't have them installed, and then coming back to this video. Now, not only will we cover Qt Designer and how to use it and the different features and functionalities, but we will also cover some conversions. The first one is how do we convert the UI file produced by Qt Designer to a Py file. So how do you convert this interface that you created to a Py file? So how do you convert it to Python code? So we will do this in more than one way. So this is the first one. So we'll do it using pyuic, which is a command that you can execute on the command line. The second way is we're going to actually load the UI without converting the code. So now I'm talking and it's a bit ambiguous, so you can just gloss over what I'm saying because we're going to come back to it. I'm going to explain much more later on. And finally, we're going to see how we can convert it manually using VS Code. So there's a special extension that we can use to convert this UI file to a Py file. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. Let's pull up Qt Designer and see what we're working with. So right here in front of me, I have PyQt5 Qt Designer open. So this is the interface. This is what it looks like as soon as you open it. You have the option to create something out of a template. So you can create a dialog with buttons, without buttons, a main window, a widget. Now the best thing that you want to get started with is the main window. So this will be the main window for our application. It opens up this guy right here. So what can I do with this? So what is this interface? So here, what you're essentially trying to do is you will build your UI using a drag and drop method. So here on the widget box on the left, you can see we have a list of different widgets. For example, we have buttons. I can grab a push button and I can drag it here. I can manually resize it. I can add other stuff like a tool button. I can add a table view. I can add a checkbox, things like that. So these are the different widgets that you can add. So I'm just going to delete these guys for now, and we'll add some others later on. So essentially, this is really it. You're building this UI through a drag and drop interface. You can use layouts to place your widgets in specific areas so that it becomes more responsive. Another thing you can do is you can have all sorts of views. You can nest widgets. So I have this guy, this main window. It has a central widget. You can see here. I'll go over what this is in a moment. Then you can add a tree widget inside it and so on. So essentially drag and drop. You get the point. So it's all about drag and drop in this case. This makes it much easier than writing all the code, especially if you have a very, very large UI that you want to build. This is much easier and much faster, and it's really visual. So what else do we have on this screen? Now on the right side, what we have here is the object inspector. Now the object inspector just shows us everything we have inside our screen. So you can see we have a menu bar, which is this part right here, the status bar, the central widget. Now if I add a button like I did before, so if I come here and I add a push button, you can see the push button gets added inside the central widget. So the central widget is this gray area right here, and I just added the push button. Now another thing I can do is I can add a label, which is just like text on the screen. I can add a text edit, so this is where you would type stuff if you were writing. You also have a line edit, which is only one line, so a text edit is like much larger. And yeah, that's a bunch of these different elements, so these different widgets that you can add. You also have a spin box, which is like a numerical counter in which you would count up or down, and I'm going to show you how they work in a moment. So these are some of the elements. You can see they all get added to the object inspector. Now another thing you can do is you can also preview. So you can either go here, so you can go to form and press preview, and then you would have it launched. So this is what it would look like if we were to launch it through the Python code. So this is how it would look like without the designer elements. So as you can see, the spin box, I can just count up or count down. I have the label, which is I can't really do anything with it. I have this line edit, which I can just type anything, and same for the text edit, and the button, which you can click. So these are our basic elements that we dragged onto the screen, and this is how we preview them. Now another way to preview is just to press Ctrl R, and this would also launch the preview of your interface. So the next thing you have is this property editor right here. So if I press on one of my widgets, so for example push button, I get a list of a bunch of properties related to this button. So the button is essentially a widget. It's inherited from the class QWidget. So all the different elements of widget, all the properties will be seen here. I'm going to ignore them for a moment. So I'm just going to minimize this, and I'm going to minimize QAbstractButton as well. So here we have QPushButton. So here you have all the properties related to this QPushButton. So auto default is a property of it, default as well. Now QAbstractButton is a bunch of other information related to it. For example, you have the text. So I can come here and I can edit the text and just type anything, and you can see that it was changed in the push button in the interface. So this is also really important. So I'm just going to type press me, and this is the new text for this push button. So you have other things. You can add an icon, you can edit these guys right here. So these are all properties of the push button. You also have the Q widget, which is the parent of the push button. So things you can change here are the size. You can change the font. So I can come here and I can change the type of font, and we can go for a totally different font. So this one, you can press OK, and you can see the font kind of changed here. You can resize it manually. You can do all sorts of things. So these are the properties of this push button. Now, on the other hand, the same thing goes for the line edit. I can come here and I can modify it. I can make it so that it's read only. So if I check read only and I launch the preview again, and I try to write here, so I'm trying to click inside this line edit, I'm not able to make any edits. So here I made it read only, so I turned it off, kind of like that. So I'm not going to go over all the different properties that are available simply because there's not enough time, and this is not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show you how to use this interface. So what we've covered so far is I showed you how to drag these UI elements onto your screen and add them to your interface. I showed you how to view them in the object inspector, as well as how to view and modify their properties in the property editor. So now we've created this UI. I'm just going to clear these guys again, and I'm going to actually keep the button and delete the others. So I'm going to say this is our interface. It's not the best looking interface, okay? So we can accept that, but this is what we'll be using as a demo, so I can show you how you can convert this code to Python code. So the first thing I'm going to do before I get started with that is to actually save this file, and I'm going to save it right here in this QtDesigner tutorial folder, and I'm just going to call it mainui.ui. So the .ui files are the files generated by QtDesigner. Okay, so now that we've created our UI file, let's actually talk about how this file looks like. So if I go here, this is my VS Code. I have the folder QtDesigner tutorial open. So this is our working directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this, and this is our mainui.ui file. It's essentially a type of XML file, and this is the type of code or the XML file content that's written, and this will represent our UI. So you can see we have a QMain window, we have the Q menu bar, the Q status bar, which is the same thing we saw before. We have the class Q widget, which is named central widget, which we saw this one right here. So this is central widget. We also have the child, which is a Q push button, and it's called push button. And we have the actual the properties, so the font, the one we just set, as well as the text. So it says press me. So this is the stuff that we set manually through the UI. So this is how we used QtDesigner to generate this UI file. Okay, so perfect. Now, what's the problem here? Well, this is a UI file. How do I open this in Python, and how do I work with it? So how do I load this code into Python? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this in 3 different ways, as I showed you at the beginning during the overview. Now, the first way is I'm just going to convert this UI file into some Python code. So the way I'm going to do this is through the terminal. I'm going to be typing a command. So here's the command that I'm going to type. So I'm going to type pyuic5. So this is the name of the module that will do the conversion. This module comes with QtDesigner when you install PyQt5 tools. So if you go back to the installation video where I install these tools, this part will come automatically with the QtDesigner. So now I say pyuic5, and then I say export. So X stands for export. And then I will call it, I'll actually write the name of the file. So mainui.ui, which is my file. Then I'm going to say output. So output this file. And then I have to name it something .py. So I'm just going to say it test ui.py. And if I press enter, so no output here, but you can see the file was created right here. So testui.file. And I'm just going to close this. I'm going to show you that this is a Python code. We did not write any of this. I didn't do this myself. This was generated using the command that I just showed you. And it essentially has all the things we have in our UI. So you can see we have the object central widget. You can see we have the fonts right here that we set. We have the font size. We have the button. Things like that, essentially. So we have all the code in one place. It was generated, and this is Python code. And now here you have the main part of the code. So this is what will get executed. We create the application, create the window. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this file right here. So if I press run, this will launch my interface. So you can see this is our main window and our button that we created. So for now, you press the button, nothing really happens, but essentially you get the gist. So we were able to create this .ui file with the PyQt5 Qt Designer. Then we used that command to convert the file from .ui to .py. Now we have our Python code, we're able to run it. Now we can add some additional code right here. So for example, I can go here and I can, so I have this button. I can go back to Designer and check the name. So it's called push button. So if I go back to VS Code, we have self.pushButton. So this represents our button right here. So don't stress too much about all the code because I know it's a lot and it might be overwhelming. But for now, just bear with me. I'm just trying to show you how we can make a small change. Now, this isn't the purpose of this tutorial. It's not a course on how to write the code, but I'm just trying to show you how you can make this change for this button that you have in the UI. So after generating the code, we can make this change as follows. So self.pushButton.clicked.connect. So here I'm saying that when this button is clicked, connect me to this other function, which I'm going to call click handler. And then I'm going to define, actually, let's call it self.clickHandler. And then I'm actually going to define a new function called click handler, and just do this, and I'm just going to print hello world. Okay, so now once I click the button, I should get hello world printed out in my output. So let's actually terminate this and run it again. And you can see we have a button here, so I'm going to press, and you can see as I press it, I get more hello worlds printed out. So this is essentially how this works. We're able to make code changes to the UI that was already generated from this command. Okay, so this looks good. This is a very good way to convert your UI files to .py files. However, this comes at a cost. So here's the problem. The problem is that, let's say I want to go back and I want to make a change to my UI. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to maybe change the style sheet of this button. So the way style sheets work are, these are similar to CSS style sheets, but they enable you to change the appearance of your widget. So now I have the button and I can say, for example, font size, and I can give it 20. And I also have background color, and I can just say yellow. So this will not look perfect, but it's just for the sake of example. So let me just fix this color. Okay. So now if I press apply, okay, this is actually Q push button, my bad. So, okay, so you can see it was changed. All right, so now that I styled it, I made a change to this button. I want my change to be reflected in my main UI. And also to highlight the changes, I'm just going to add another thing, which is a label right here. So I'm just going to say, this is a label. So I have my label, and I'm just going to move it to the center. Okay, so again, this is just for the sake of example, but here's what I'm trying to highlight. So I'm trying to highlight that I just made these changes and I want them to be reflected in my Python code. However, if I go back to VS Code and I run my file again, so this will launch the old file. It will not launch the new file. Why is that? This is because the change, it was reflected here in the mainui.ui file. So here you can find, there it is. So you can find the style sheet that we added here. So the font size and the color yellow. So why wasn't it reflected in our Python file? Well, the reason is simply because we need to regenerate. So we need to generate this file all over again. Now, the way we can do this, we go back to the terminal. So we go back to the terminal, we run the same command all over again. And here's what happens. It will overwrite this file and the code we added for printing hello world is gone. So now I'm going to run this file again. And you have the new UI, but now if I press the button, you can go back to the terminal and you can see nothing is being outputted. So this is from the previous instance, nothing is being outputted. So why is this problematic? This is problematic because as a programmer, your interface will evolve with time. So you will always want to make changes to your interface as well as changes to your code. It's definitely not practical for you to actually have to create and overwrite your file each time. So imagine, so for now we just had a button, which is one function. Imagine I have like 50 buttons and I have to rewrite the code each time. This is not practical and it's definitely a cause for concern. So this isn't the best way. You can definitely use this way if you only want to create your UI once. However, I wouldn't count on the fact since you might always end up need to make some changes, maybe just changes to the styling, changes to the colors. So it's definitely not the best way. And in fact, when you create it here, it will give you this comment. So this was the generated file. It will say, warning, any manual changes made to this file will be lost when PyQt5 is run again. So not the best way. There are definitely better ways to do it. And this is what we'll see next. So we're going to try the second method of loading our UI. So before I do that, I'm going to close this test UI file. I'm going to right click and delete it as well. So next up, we want to actually load our UI through a different method, in a method in which every time we make a change to this UI, we will find it all over again. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new file. So this will be main.py. So now we're going to write the code in this file to load the UI dynamically so that we don't have to do it every single time manually. So here's how our code will look like. Our code will look like something like this. So I'm just going to go through every single line so that it makes sense for you. Okay, so at the start, we just have some imports. We want to import QMain window as well as QApplication from PyQt5 Qt widgets. Why is this important? Simply because here you have your QMain window, which is the window we want to open, and QApplication is the thing that you will run, and this is what will execute your application. This is what will launch it. Now, on the other hand, we have this guy right here, which is our main character. So we have the pyqt5.uic, which will import loadUi. So this loadUi function is what will load this UI into our code. And I'm going to show you how in a minute. Next, we will define a class called mainUI. You can call this whatever you want. It will inherit QMain window because our application is a QMain window. Then you will define a constructor. So this is just some Python object-oriented stuff. So if you want to kind of understand this a bit more, you can go over some Python object-oriented. But essentially, what we're saying here is we're defining the class. We define the constructor. So this is what will be run every time you create this mainUI object. We will call the constructor of the parent class, so super, which is QMain window. And finally, one line of code, we will just say load the UI. So here I will load the UI from mainui.ui. And finally here, so in our main part, we will create a Q application. We will instantiate the main UI, and then we will show it and then execute the application. Before I do run it, I noticed a mistake right here. So here, this should be self. So this should also take self. It will take the instance that we created of this class. So sorry about that. But now if we run it, we should definitely see the output file. So you can see here that this is the UI that we designed in Designer. You can see it right here. We were able to load it. So this is our second method. Now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prove to you why this is better than the first method. So I'm going to follow the same logic. When we press the button, we're going to type hello world. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say self.pushButton, and I'm going to show you why we say push button in a moment, .click.connect, and I'm going to say self.clickHandler. And then I'm going to define the function with self, and then I'm going to say print hello world. So why push button? Because the name in Designer, if we go back here and we press on the button, it's called push button. So we're calling it using the same name. And that's the beauty of this loadUi guy right here. It loads these attributes of this class as variables that you can call. So you can call self.pushButton. So let's try it out. So if I run it, here we go. So here we have, this is our UI. Now I'm going to press on press me, and you can see that hello world was printed in the output right here. So the more I press hello world, the more it should get printed. And yeah, so we did the change. Now, what do we want to do next? We want to make a change in the UI and make sure that this will not get rid of our code related to the button. So I'm going to go back to the UI, and I'm just going to add, let's say, a spin box or a text editor, something like that. So it's pretty messy, but we're just trying it out. So now if I, let's say, stop it and I run it again, you can see the changes were made. However, our code related to the button still remains. So if I press me and I scroll back, you can see hello world was just printed. So this is the beauty of it. You're able to load the UI, make changes dynamically to your UI without losing any of your code changes. So if I were to suggest a method, I would definitely say go with the second method. But I also had to teach you the first one because it's important to learn how to convert this .ui file into a .py file. This brings me to my third and final method. So the final method I'm going to go through is how to convert the .ui file again into this the py file again. So here we have this test UI, so I'm just going to delete it again. And I'm actually going to delete our main.py since we don't need it anymore. So this is more similar to method number 1. We have the .ui file. Remember how we typed in the terminal, so pyuic, and we exported it, we created this test.ui.py. We're going to do this, but manually through VS Code. So how can we do this? So there's a special extension, if we go to our extensions in VS Code, called PyQt integration. This extension has multiple functionalities, but one of them is converting this .ui file into a .py file. So how do I do it? If I go back to my code and I just simply right-click, obviously you have to have the extension installed, sorry I didn't say that, but you have to have the extension installed, then you right-click on your .ui file, you go down to PyQt compile form. So once you compile the form, this will generate this UI_main UI py file, and this is the exact same type of generation that we had in the first method. Now, again, this also has the same limitation. If you do it again, it will overwrite your code changes. Is it recommended? No, but I also had to cover all grounds in this video, so it was really important to cover it as well. I always recommend using the loadUi method, which is method number 2. So you load your UI elements using this loadUi function. And yeah, that's really the best way to go. It's the safest way. As a programmer, you're able to make dynamic changes as well as save all your code changes. Alright, so that's really it for this video. I covered everything I wanted to cover, so Qt Designer, all 3 conversion methods. I hope you found it useful, and yeah, that's really it. I'll see you in the next one, and bye bye.